YouTubers, what's up? Glad you're here. Please subscribe, like, comment, and we're gonna roll.
What if my partner is controlling our sex life? That's today's question.
Okay, so guys, today's topic is a hot one, right? But what if you could actually ask us questions in a live format? Or what happens if you could ask questions and submit them in a very confidential way? Or what happens if you could get access to a how-to? That's all possible over on Patreon. Go to patreon.com and search Betrayed Addicted Expert, because we're going to be hitting these topics today. But you'll probably have more questions.
Also, I learned this. If you go to more details while you're listening to this podcast, you can click the link for Patreon, and it's not going to stop the podcast. So you can keep listening and go find us.
Cool.
Awesome. Okay, I'm going to share a review. It says, I love this podcast. I just discovered it, and I've been binging. It's given me the courage to approach my wife with greater honesty than I have until now. I've been sharing it with my whole family, and I think the skills and ideas discussed apply to close relationships of all kinds, not just those with addiction and betrayal. Thank you for your help. The reason I wanted to share that one is how he's sharing with his whole family. It's not that scary to share our podcast. You can do it. And I know it. The topic of what we talk about, people might think whatever, but just share it with people. It's helpful. So thank you for sharing it.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. Okay.
All right. So what if you're feeling controlled by your partner?
Coby and I have both felt this, and I know we're not alone.
Oh, no, you guys are the only ones that have ever felt controlled by your partner.
Seriously? That's not what you said before we started.
It's all Coby's fault.
Right. Think about it. Think of I don't know percentage-wise, but think of how many people feel like they are forced or controlled, or their sexuality and their sex life is controlled by their partner, and there's resentment around sex.
Yeah, and we're not talking in an abusive way. We're really talking about it happens or it doesn't based on your partner.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it happening or being what you do, how you explore, what your sexuality is. It feels like, I can't fully, be me and be who I am because my partner either wants too much sex or my partner never wants sex. And sex is a topic that definitely brings a lot of resentment into relationships. And I think most people who, if not all people who have been in a marriage, have felt some resentment around sex in a relationship.
And I'm going to say it again if I haven't already, but bringing sex, I almost said sex top over. I don't know what I say.
Sextember?
Sextember. I know how to speak.
Sextober? We're not going 2 months.
No way. No. So Sextember.
Wait, seriously? No way.
And then Sexvember. No, okay.
Okay, so I'm talking about it more over on my Mama Bear Fitness account, okay? So the audience is a little different.
Okay.
They don't all share my story. In fact, most of them don't. But what I'm finding is what you're saying. It's across the board, people are either not having it for so many different reasons, or they're just feeling dysfunctional in their sexuality.
Right.
And so being able to say, hey, let's have this open conversation, and I'll keep it anonymous over there, is bringing out a lot of really
interesting things.
That I'm like, okay, this is cool because these people don't share my story, and they still have some hang-ups.
Right. Yeah, I've never met anybody or any couple that comes together and they're exactly the same way and the same person when it comes to sex. Our sex is so individual, yet it's about connection, and so that dichotomy coming together is an interesting one to kind of grapple with, and it has to do with compatibility and connection in other ways. How do you come to the table as an individual and be allowed to be you and express who you are and still be connected to your partner and not end up resenting each other? It's a tricky thing.
Okay? It's tricky would be an enormous understatement. Tricky, scary, vulnerable, exposing, all those things.
If you're feeling controlled by a partner, or you're feeling forced or pressured or shut down by a partner, then you're totally normal. And those feelings of longing for something else or feeling resentment, or that's totally, completely normal. However, those feelings, when they turn into a victim role, a victim stance, where you just resent, and all of your happiness when it comes to your sexuality is dependent upon them changing, then that shuts you down, and it takes ownership away from you and your sexuality. You put it on your partner and say, well, if he weren't this way or if she weren't that way, then I could be happy. Then, and the fact of the matter is they are who they are. You can't control them, but you still have ownership of your sexuality, and you can take charge of that.
What does that look like?
Well, let's talk about what it looked like when we were in the victim.
Okay, yes. Start there.
Okay.
So what does that look like?
Both of you are looking at me.
Okay, do you want me to go?
Yes.
Okay, so for me, as the betrayed, and this is my story again, so yours might be different, but for me, and many of those that I've been able to help, it goes to, we would have a better sex life, or I would maybe enjoy it more, or I wouldn't feel some of those feelings that Brandon mentioned had he not had an affair, had he not looked at porn.
Right.
Like, he is messing all of this up.
Right.
And I felt that way for decades.
Now, Ashlynn, is there some truth there to that?
There is some truth.
Right.
And the hard part is he would come back at me and like gaslight, manipulate, and say, "This is your fault. Like, you're."
He would blame you.
Yes, and it
so
was
you guys were blaming each other.
totally like.
Yeah.
So I would
Absolutely.
take on this, like, it's like one day I was blaming him, and then the next day I was like, "Oh man, I am a mess. Like, this is all my fault." Because he would tell me so.
Yeah.
It's totally true. It's really interesting how the hijacking went from being hijacked by the need to numb with sex to being hijacked in shame and then blaming.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
Pretty curious, right?
Yep.
The hijacking transitioned with just the idea of being, rejected. And that happened in split seconds.
Well, I wonder, I need to spit this out. How many affairs or how much porn use or relapses have been justified by this resentment around sex?
Oh,
Yeah. And
that was one of the, Okay, so resentment for me was like a foundational
Denial chip.
Yes, justification tool in order for me to act out. And it would be like...
Let me be the voice of denial for a minute, though. But
Okay.
So what if Ashlynn hasn't given you sex for a long time? What are you supposed to do?
Honestly,
Yeah.
how else? What else am I supposed to do?
Yeah,
I'm super stressed at work.
If it weren't for her and how shut down she were and those things, then you wouldn't have to look elsewhere, right?
Totally.
Yeah.
Those were exactly the things that went through my head, and it was the sad part about it is I was drinking my own Kool-Aid, and I was and the more time that went by, the bigger that resentment and that story and that narrative.
So
came.
but right there is where the stuckness is if you come back to Ashlynn and you say, look, I'm not having enough sex. What's wrong with you? Why don't we change things? Why don't you give me more?
That's a great way to like.
Oh, that just turns her
change
on.
things, right?
It just gets things going, right? No, not at
especially
all.
when you're
Not
acting
at
out. Like,
all.
there's no safety, no trust.
Yeah, he's acting out. He's not transparent. There's no safety and trust, and then he's pouting and complaining that you need to change. You need to change. You need to change. You need to change, so that we can have sex more. In the meantime, you're justifying, behaviors that is infidelity, right?
Yeah.
And so, but Ashlynn, from your side of things, you're saying, well, I don't want to have sex with you because all of this stuff is happening. Like, no, thank you. I don't desire this at all. Because of you, our sex life is broken, And Kobe's doing all these things, and it's true. Some of the things that you're doing, that is on you, Kobe, right?
For sure.
Absolutely. But were there things, Ashlyn, that you could have done differently, rather than sit back and just blame Kobe and say, look, I mean, there's a laundry list of all this stuff you're doing, Kobe, right?
Totally.
So what could you have done differently, Ashlyn?
Sat in that and taken some ownership. I mean, let's be honest, like both, like you said, no one comes into a relationship the same.
But he's manipulating, he's
Yeah.
lying, he's breaking the very foundation of your relationship. And you're sitting here telling me, Ashlyn, that you can sit in that and take ownership.
Of my stuff.
Yes.
I'm not taking on his stuff. Like, what he's doing is still his choice. However, I can see that I do play a role. Like, I didn't have boundaries, and I didn't say, hey, this is not okay with me. And I didn't stand up for myself.
Step into that conflict, have those
Yeah.
boundaries, be
I
empowered.
had none of that. And
Yes.
that was the empowerment. I had zero because of the blame and the shifting for me. It just like kept pushing me down.
It was pretty
more.
oppressive.
Yes.
My gaslighting, and with time, it was like just like one brick after another on top of you that I would put down.
Yeah, like you're not enough. It was all those things.
Right.
And I think that's why when I did find my voice, it was this like, oh my gosh, like I have a
Yes.
voice. And
Yes.
it became really powerful for me.
Yes.
And it did change who I am.
Yes.
I also think part of this that I felt, and I think a lot of the betrayed can feel, is go into fear. So I feel controlled by fear. So I don't have
yes.
control over my sex life because I'm only acting out, or not acting out, but
Fear will
Accommodating.
not,
accommodating. Yeah.
and fear will not help you to feel sexual.
No.
At
well,
all.
it's not connecting. It's
Right.
like I'm being
It's
dutiful.
obligatory.
I'm doing my part
Yeah.
as a wife.
Right. Yes.
That feels great.
Yeah. Excuse me. Having sex can really destroy good sex or a good sex life, right? That's kind of what you're saying.
Yeah, that sounds so funny.
It sounds so backwards, but when you out of that dutiful place, you feel used, you feel taken advantage of, and don't have those boundaries. That, Ashlyn, you do have the ability to have those boundaries. And I realize the gaslighting and manipulation and all those things are tricky and very sophisticated and hard to understand when you're in that crazy making place, to be able to stand up and say, no, this is where I'm at and this is what I need. However, you do have the power to do that, right?
Yeah. Well, and it's like you always say, like if nothing changes, nothing changes.
Right.
And that's really the point of us talking about these hard things through the month of
Sextember.
I can't say it. I've been saying it every day. Because that's one of the things we miss, is we just don't talk about it.
Yeah.
And I'm unhappy, you're unhappy, we're both full of resentment, and let's just not talk about it.
Well, you said something really, I thought, really cool earlier, which is Sextember is not about taking your clothes off every day,
Yeah.
right? It's about what, Ashlyn?
Having the hard conversation is connection. So, for example, a friend said, hey, before I saw this thing about Sextember, she said, we have sex once a month. And it's because he's, working so much and I'm focused on kids and we just don't make time for it. And she said, we're not doing Sextember, but we are, because we've actually started talking about why we're not having sex.
Yeah, excellent.
And so I'm like, oh, you're doing it. Like,
Right.
that is the whole point.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
I think that statement just let a lot of people off the hook.
Yeah.
Because the expectation is not to have sex every day, although that can totally be it.
Well, that's what I feel like I tricked people. I said that.
Yeah.
And then it was like, everyone failed. Like day 7, like 90% of people said they'd already failed.
Well,
including us.
including us.
But I would say it is about having sex every day. It's just, what is sex? And
Yes.
sex starts long before penetration. Sex is about attraction and connection. And coming back to what we were talking about earlier, if I'm resenting my wife because she won't have sex with me, I resent her. If sex is about attraction and connection, how can resentment and attraction work together? They don't really. Now, as a man, I could still say, well, I still want to get off. I still want sex. So I'm going to go use your
That was entirely me.
Yeah, I'm going to go use your body so I can get off, but I still hate you. I resent you. I can't stand you.
Yeah.
And you can see how destructive that is. So Sextember hopefully can be something that's the opposite of that, which is, if I'm feeling this way sexually, or let's talk. Let's talk about the hard conversation. Let's get used to knowing each other, maybe just from communicating verbally. And so we can really understand where we're at and how we feel and who we are. And then the love making is going to be incredible if you can lay that foundation first.
And I think there's also a different part of this where sex doesn't always have to be love making. There is such a thing as a nooner, and it is meaning it's an agreed upon sexual act that both parties like concede to, like, okay, hey, this is a thing, and we realize that we don't have a lot of time. Like, lovemaking might not have the space right now, but guess what? We can still connect.
It's different though. Like I would argue there still is love in there.
Yeah. For sure. And I'm not trying to say that there
isn't.
Because
old quickies were very different and
yes.
disconnecting. And that can still be connecting.
Yeah, totally. What I'm saying is just because you're not making love doesn't mean that you're not connected.
I would and how these are all semantics, how we word it, right? Because I would say that in your relationship you can turn sex into lovemaking every single time, even if it is a quickie. That there is a real
connection.
There's a connection there. You understand what and healthy sex isn't always about both partners getting pleased. It can be, hey, I love you, and I realize you want it right now, and we're connected, and let's do this. But love needs to be there. Attraction needs to be there. Safety needs to be there. Trust needs to be there. If those things aren't there, and it's fear-based obligation sex, then it's the opposite of lovemaking. You're making fear, and you're making resentment, and you're having sex.
Okay, I have a question.
Okay.
What is the difference between obligatory sex and accommodating sex?
Oh, that's a great question. What do you think, Coby? I have an answer, but what do you think?
So Ashlynn, if you were to come to me and say, Coby, guess what? Right now, I just need to orgasm. And I was like totally preoccupied up to my whatever, my earlobes and eyelids in work, but I recognize that you're coming to me and saying, hey, listen, this is what I need right now. I can be accommodating, realizing that you trust me enough to say, hey, this will really serve me right now, and this is what I need, and I can accommodate you without feeling used. Maybe that's the difference, actually, is feeling used.
I think obligatory, when you say that, sounds like there's not an option of no, that won't work. Accommodating is more, okay, like I can be there for you, I can show up.
Yeah.
And I can say no if I need to. But I don't know. I mean, these are semantics, but I think that the important point is this, and I hope every single one of our audience members understands this. You are never obliged or forced to have sex. That's never healthy. And at times you'll feel like, well, I need to, or else they're going to act out, or I need to because that's what a good spouse does, or whatever. You're never forced to have sex. Now, accommodating a partner, because your libidos will be different, your sexuality is different. That can be part of working with different compatibility and working together as to where each of you are. As long as you're being open and honest and boundaried, then that stuff can be okay.
Yeah. We're going to talk more in deep dive about this specific thing, but I think what you're saying is really one of the keys in helping us shift from the obligatory sex to, like, I'm here and I'm showing up. And it was me letting down some walls, as well as Coby, and saying and having those really vulnerable, like it's almost as vulnerable as sex itself, to say, like, this is what I'm feeling right now. Well, I'm scared. I'm only showing up right now because I'm scared and I don't feel comfortable. and for him to hear that.
Ashlynn, those kind of communications and connections, those over time, if you're able to have those, they turn into good sex.
Yeah, they do.
Because you feel safety, you feel connection, you feel trust, you feel loved and cared about, right?
Right.
So
Right.
it's that easy, right?
It's super easy. I will also give a disclaimer. For myself, I did have to do some EMDR trauma work around sex because I did have some stuff that I brought in and had like my own mind was getting in the way. It was something I couldn't do through talk therapy. I had to do it.
I've seen EMDR, and I know we plug EMDR a lot, but when it comes to sex, especially sex after betrayal, work wonders with couples. And you know, she usually has to come in pretty specific, saying, "Look, I want to go there. I want to discuss," and it can get pretty deep and explicit. And when she's reprocessing her experiences with sex, where she's felt used and obligated and even abused sometimes sexually, and to go there and to desensitize those things after betrayal is really, really helpful. And EMDR does a good job at that.
Yeah.
So.
Awesome. Okay, I hope that one of the takeaways from this conversation is not have sex, but have sex through talking about sex. Be open, communicate, identify how uncomfortable the conversation might be. And you know what? For some of you, it might not be uncomfortable at all. And if that's the case, that's great.
I think to sum this up, it's instead of playing the victim, instead of sitting in resentment, waiting for them to change so that you can be happy, be honest, be vulnerable, be empowered, overcome your shame around your own sexuality, be open, and that is what will shift you into a healthy connection and a healthy sex life in your relationship, instead of sitting back and waiting and victiming out.
Awesome.
All right, we'll see you over on Patreon for the rest of this podcast.
The deep dive will be a little how-to. We've got 4 steps on how to transition with this to eliminate control in your relationship, but really build connection.
All right, see you guys.
See you guys.